If you are old enough to remember the foibles of a certain president around the turn of the millennium, you're likely familiar with the phrase, "It's not the crime, it's the cover-up." For Corporal Laurean, stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, this was undoubtedly true. Laurean likely committed either sexual assault or adultery, but his cover-up made him a murderer. This is Conduct Unbecoming. I'm Erin, and I'm your host. A heads up. This case discusses the death of a pregnant person and her unborn child. If that means this episode isn't for you, all good. Catch me next time. Cesar Armando Laurean joined the Marine Corps out of his hometown of Las Vegas and moved to what I think is his first duty station at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Sometime in his first 3 years in the Marine Corps, Laurean got married to a female Marine a few years older than him, and together they had a daughter. By February 2007, Corporal Laurean worked as the non-commissioned officer in charge at the Separations Section for 2nd Marine Logistics Group, also known as 2nd MLG. As the NCOIC, Laurean was responsible for supervising the Marines in the unit, alongside the officer in charge, Chief Warrant Officer Beer. 2nd MLG began having problems with 19-year-old Lance Corporal Maria Lauterbach. She kept picking up disciplinary infractions. So Chief Warrant Officer Beer tasked Laurean with counseling Maria. What no one could expect was the direction that counseling would take. On May 11, 2007, Maria formally accused Laurean of sexually assaulting her 6 weeks earlier, on March 26th, and again a couple of weeks later in April. To a friend, Laurean admitted a sexual encounter which he described as consensual. But even a consensual sexual relationship would be a problem for Laurean and his career in the Marine Corps, where it's illegal to commit adultery. Beyond his friend, though, Laurean denied the assault, and an investigation began into the report. Even though rule number 1 of harassment and assault reports is don't move the victim, the Marine Corps transferred Maria to another section at Camp Lejeune and issued a military protective order. A military protective order is a restraining order issued by a unit commander. It has similar flavors to a civilian restraining order, but there are a few important distinctions. First, unlike a civilian restraining order, a military protective order doesn't require a hearing. Second, although the service member subject to the order still has to follow the order while off base, civilian law enforcement doesn't and can't enforce the military protective order. In spite of the military protective order, Laurean and Maria continued spending time together. They were seen at least once off base at a local dry cleaner, and once on base, in the giftware department of the base exchange. I've been in a number of Marine Corps exchanges. I don't know what area is considered the giftware department. It's also entirely possible that I'm either not quite Southern enough or not quite polite enough to understand properly what the giftware department is. In June 2007, the month after making her report, Maria discovered she was pregnant. She believed she'd fallen pregnant as a result of the sexual assaults in March and April, and she told people as much. In September 2007, Maria sought permission to move off base. to move out of the barracks and into separate housing in which she could raise a child. The following month, in October, her request was approved, and on November 5th, Maria moved into her rented room. Later that month, Maria told prosecutors that she no longer believed her child was conceived as a result of the reported sexual assault. Her estimated date of conception was mid-May, not March, as she previously believed. Maria was about 7 months pregnant as the holiday season approached. As she grew more pregnant, Laurean shared a harebrained scheme with his friend. He thought if he could convince Maria to move to Mexico, he could discredit her as a deserter and help salvage his own military career. Perhaps if NCIS believed Maria was a deserter, they wouldn't believe her allegations of sexual assault. On Friday, December 14, 2007, 20-year-old Maria worked from 7:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. It was an early day for the unit Christmas party, though Maria declined to attend. An hour after Maria left work, her roommate and landlord found a note which read, "Sorry, but I cannot take this Marine Corps life anymore, so I am going away. Sorry for the inconvenience. Maria." The roommate, also a Marine, later took the note to a warrant officer at Maria's new unit. After leaving work, Maria drove her blue Hyundai to the ATM and used her card to withdraw $700 from her account. A half hour after her roommate discovered the note, Maria spoke to a ticket agent at the bus station while she purchased a ticket. She was heavily pregnant, and perhaps that stood out to the ticket agent. A heavily pregnant woman undertaking a 2-day trip by bus, not exactly comfortable. Maria explained to the ticket agent that the father of her child, another Marine, would join her at her destination soon. With that, Maria purchased a one-way ticket from Jacksonville, North Carolina, to El Paso, Texas. The bus would leave the next day on December 15th. Laurean's life was equally busy as the holiday season approached. On December 14th, he manned the house while his wife attended a Christmas party. A couple of days later, 21-year-old Laurean drove to Lowe's to pick up the supplies he needed to build a fire pit in his backyard and some other maintenance items. He purchased a wheelbarrow, paint, and concrete blocks to ring his fire pit. His neighbors said this was a new development. They remembered a bonfire in the backyard in December, but didn't remember any bonfires before then. And no bonfires after. By December 19th, 2007, it became clear. Maria was missing. She hadn't reported to work, and her command called her mother in Ohio to inquire if her family knew where Maria was. They didn't. Both the command and NCIS considered Maria absent without leave. But her mother thought differently and filed a missing persons report in Ohio. It became obvious that Maria didn't make the trip to El Paso. The day after her mother filed the missing persons report, someone found her cell phone near the gate to Camp Lejeune. They used it to call her sister, who advised them to turn it into local police. 4 days later, on Christmas Eve, a man used Maria's debit card to access her bank account in an attempt to withdraw funds. I could only find this described as an attempt, but I'm not sure if it was an attempt because he didn't know the personal identification number to gain access, or because Maria had potentially emptied her account when she withdrew the $700. Maybe this man, who looked like Laurean, was trying to buy a final Christmas present. Or maybe he was trying to make it look like Maria was still in the area and still accessing her accounts. Like Maria was still alive. On January 7th, investigators found Maria's blue Hyundai parked outside the Jacksonville bus station, but no Maria. That day, NCIS caught up on the investigation and realized Maria wasn't AWOL, she was missing. Then they learned of the discovery of her cell phone, which had been given to local police, the ATM withdrawals, and the bus ticket. The following day, on January 8th, NCIS sat Laurean down for an interview. They had a missing, heavily pregnant Marine, and they knew these two had a history. They'd been investigating the reported rape. At the end of the interview, Laurean asked a question. I presume as delicately as he knew how. He wanted to know what would happen to the sexual assault investigation against him if Maria never returned. Then he went home and ran an internet search on Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. 2 days later, on January 10th, Laurean and his wife went to a civilian criminal defense attorney for a conversation. It's unclear whether this was an attorney Laurean had on retainer for the rape investigation, or if this was someone new they were consulting. Either way, during that conversation, Laurean and his wife learned that he could face the death penalty should this become a murder investigation. The following day, on Friday, January 11th, Laurean didn't show up for work. While he fled, an attorney, his wife, and a Marine Corps sergeant showed up to the Onslow County Sheriff's Office to report Maria's murder. Laurean's wife said she'd only found out about the murder the day before. In response to this report, investigators obtained a warrant and searched the Laurean home on both Friday the 11th and Saturday the 12th. Inside the garage, they found a number of items stained with Maria's blood. These included a storage container, a paint can, a pink plastic swim raft, tan pillowcase, painting equipment, a pegboard, a white plastic bag, perhaps most heartbreakingly, a baby swing, a box, a wall, the ceiling, and the floor. Some sources report that the paint Laurean purchased at Lowe's was used to try and cover up some of the blood. Investigators spoke with the neighbor who recounted seeing a blue Hyundai parked at Laurean's house recently, and explained that Laurean held a once-in-his-tenancy bonfire the month before. Hearing about the bonfire from the neighbor, investigators turned their attention to the pit. There they found Maria and her fetus burned and buried. Further DNA testing revealed Laurean was not the father of Maria's unborn child. Her son wasn't a product of their sexual encounter, whether it was consensual or otherwise. On the 12th, federal officials issued an arrest warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. During this investigation, Laurean's wife turned over several notes she found in their home. In the notes, Laurean detailed how Maria committed suicide and explained that he'd buried her. Laurean claimed that Maria showed up at his house, disoriented and agitated, and told Laurean that she planned to leave, which, for those following along at home, is exactly what Laurean wanted. He claimed that she demanded money and that he went with her to buy that bus ticket on December 14th. Then they returned to his home because, remember, his wife was out, but there they began arguing. Laurean said Maria produced a knife and slit her own throat, But this is inconsistent with the results of a forensic examination of Maria's remains, which indicated Maria died by blunt force trauma to the head. Investigators identified a crowbar as the murder weapon. There was a superficial 4-inch wound to the left side of Maria's neck, but the autopsy report indicated that could have been made post-mortem. Something I thought about while reading these facts is that I can't put together where Laurean's daughter was during all of this. I don't know if she was home when this all happened or if she was at that Christmas party with her mother. Even in Laurean's absence, the people of the state of North Carolina indicted Laurean in January 2008 on charges of first-degree murder, robbery with a dangerous weapon, financial transaction card theft, attempted transaction card fraud, and obtaining property by false pretenses. The district attorney later dismissed the charge of obtaining property by false pretense. It was largely believed that Laurean, who'd been born in Mexico, had returned to Mexico to avoid charges. On January 29th, a U.S. Embassy official in Mexico City reported that Mexican authorities had also issued a warrant for Laurean's arrest. Months later, on April 5, 2008, America's Most Wanted featured an episode about Laurean. 5 days later, on April 10th, authorities apprehended Laurean in San Juan de la Vina, in Michoacan, Mexico, with roughly $1 to his name. Officials working an anti-kidnapping operation had spotted Laurean wandering the street and became suspicious when they realized he didn't speak Spanish very well. He was taken into custody and later identified by his tattoos. But this arrest set up a bit of a standoff. Mexican authorities would not extradite Laurean if he faced the death penalty, pursuant to the extradition treaty between Mexico and the United States. 5 months after he was apprehended, the district attorney in Onslow County agreed not to seek the death penalty, and in return, a Mexican judge agreed to extradition. However, the following month, prior to the extradition taking place, Laurean again petitioned the Mexican courts to deny extradition. He argued that North Carolina's life without parole sentence was also barred under the extradition treaty between Mexico and the United States, and, separately, should be considered cruel and unusual punishment. The court appears to have been unpersuaded. A year after his apprehension, Mexican authorities extradited Laurean back to the United States in April 2009. At the end of that year, Maria's mother filed a civil wrongful death suit against Laurean and his wife. In August 2010, Laurean's trial began. Given the publicity around his case, the court granted a change of venue and moved the trial to Wayne County. At trial, Laurean's defense counsel offered an alternative theory. He suggested that it wasn't Laurean that killed Maria, but rather his wife. Defense counsel said Laurean's wife, in a fit of rage, grabbed the crowbar and killed Maria with a single swing. Laurean's family was steadfast in their belief that he was, quote, a good man, and that he didn't murder Maria. The Wayne County jury deliberated for just 3 hours before rejecting this alternate theory and convicting Laurean of first-degree murder, financial transaction card theft, and attempted financial transaction card fraud. They found him not guilty of robbery with a dangerous weapon. Laurean received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Laurean appealed to the North Carolina Court of Appeal, asserting the trial court erred twice. First, he claims the court erred by excluding evidence of some of Maria's behavior while allowing testimony about her reputation for truthfulness. Second, Laurean claims the court erred when it did not submit second-degree murder, a lesser included offense, to the jury for consideration. First, let's get the victim-blaming argument out of the way. Laurean argued that he should have been allowed to introduce evidence of specific instances where Maria's behavior led to Laurean disciplining her. He believed that her behavior and his correlated punishment of that behavior created a motive to lie and to falsely accuse Laurean of rape. But Laurean wasn't on trial for rape, so whether or not Maria had motive to fabricate was functionally meaningless. The appellate court rejected the argument that it was error to exclude these details. So they turned to Laurean's other argument. Laurean contended that because the prosecutor didn't put on evidence illustrating the circumstances that led to him swinging that crowbar, the jury should have been allowed to consider whether he actually had the intent to kill, whether he actually premeditated the murder. The rule in North Carolina was that if there is enough evidence to prove each and every element of first-degree murder, and there is no evidence to negate the elements other than the defendant's denial, the judge should not submit second-degree murder to the jury as a lesser-included offense. In applying that rule, the Court of Appeal concluded Laurean did not merit the second-degree murder instruction because there was no evidence he killed without premeditation and deliberation. It wasn't a question of whether Laurean committed the murder, it was a question of which degree of murder and how premeditated the murder was. Laurean never took the stand and never described an incident where he snapped and killed Maria. He'd given her potential disappearance a lot of thought. He described to a friend how beneficial it would be if Maria was unavailable for the investigation into sexual assault and rape. He told a friend that if she deserted the Marine Corps and fled to Mexico, his life would be markedly better. I don't have all of the details of how Maria came to arrive at Laurean's house. Some sources indicate that he enticed her to come to the house in order to receive some supplies for the baby. With all of those details that they have and I don't, they concluded there was no error in rejecting the second-degree murder instruction. Finding no error at the trial court, the Court of Appeal determined Laurean's claim merited no relief and affirmed the judgment. He further appealed to the Supreme Court, where his writ was denied. With Laurean's appeal dealt with, the Lauterbach's wrongful death suit was cleared to move forward. But I've not found the results of the wrongful death suit. That may be more of a function of North Carolina privacy and public record laws than it is a function of the suit being dismissed or incomplete. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it. I invite you to submit case suggestions and feedback to conductunbecomingpod@gmail.com or on conductunbecomingpod.com. Join me next time when we tackle the case of a disgruntled former airman and his retribution. Until then, take care. Conduct Unbecoming is a podcast where I get to talk about interesting crimes and cases that involve U.S. military service members. I research, write, and produce the podcast myself. The opinions expressed are my own, and perhaps it's obvious. Conduct Unbecoming is not approved, authorized, or endorsed by the Department of Defense.